Welcome back to the Crash Course podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. We've got a lot to talk to you guys tonight about as far as the NFL playoffs. The Colts are in the playoffs. Think about how good this Colts team is, and they're the 7th seed. I wouldn't even be in the playoffs if it was last year. Which is wild to think about. So the AFC is stacked. The NFC will be wild as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But B. Scott, real quick, before we get into things, how about our Ball State Fighting Cardinals getting their first...
You don't get to celebrate.
I do. No, I get to celebrate. Yes, I do. I get to celebrate.
You did not pick them to win the MAC championship. I did. You did not pick them to win the bowl game. And I did.
Okay, so by that logic, let's say you pick the Bills, does that mean that you're not allowed to be happy for the Colts if the Colts beat the Bills?
Wait, did you say cheer for the Bulls?
The Bills. The Bills. No, I said so. That means if you pick the Bills when we pick the Colts later, or if I pick the Bills.
No. I'm just saying every time we talk about Ball State in bowl game situations or championship game situations, you have gone totally against them.
Right, but I have a little thing called the crash kiss of death. So I was trying to put that exactly. Let's put that bad magic on him. Yeah,
and you also picked Clemson.
I did pick Clemson.
Ohio State.
Yep, and we have Ohio. Dude, when I was looking through Twitter the day after the Sugar Bowl where Ohio State won, which, by the way, the fact that Ohio State won by that much, I mean, it's unfathomable to me that, like, we talked about a little bit last week, that Dabo Swinney would give a team that much ammunition going into the game. But I saw
they already had ammunition going into the game because they felt like they gave up last year's game. They lost last year's game, and they wanted to prove everybody wrong.
Right.
And then Dabo comes out and says, "Oh, I have them ranked 11th."
Yeah, it's one thing to say like they shouldn't have got in because of 6 games. Because first of all, like the thing that kind of irks me more than anything about any criticism of Ohio State, and I've said it before, I am not an Ohio State guy. I used to vehemently hate Ohio State. I don't care as much now. Like, they're fine now. That was a little bit, I think, like, you know, just me being a young sports fan and hating them for, like, really no reason. But, like I've never been a big Ohio State guy, but yet, like, for one, like, ranking them 11th or whatever that Dabo wanted to do, and the fact that, like, I saw a tweet from Danny Cannell that was like, maybe it's because they only played 6 games. That's why they were fresher against Clemson or whatever. And I was like, you know what? Like, they didn't play 6 games by choice. They didn't play 6 games because they thought that was an easier path to the playoff than to play the full slate of games. The Big Ten screwed up, and yes, I mean, you can say it's the Big Ten's fault for doing what they did. We've talked about that before. You can blame whoever you want, but you can blame whoever you want besides Ohio State. Ohio State went out, played the games. You know, they can't help it that other teams were not as responsible as far as COVID, because let's also bring up that point. The reason why they didn't play more than six or 7 games is because of a global pandemic. So it's not like they were like, you know what? Everybody always plays 12 games. What if we played half of those?
Right.
Let's play a half of the games and see what happens. It was
like Kirk Herbstreit kept saying in the game. You know, they've only played 6 games. They haven't really figured out. They haven't gotten into a rhythm yet. And
that's true,
got so choppy because of the season. They had a shortened off season. Everything was just out of whack. So this team is finally now rolling into their groove.
Right.
Whereas Clemson and Alabama and Notre Dame all played double-digit games and had already found their routine. They've already got into a groove. And Ohio State hadn't yet. You know, it takes a while to figure those types of things out. I mean, they basically played a half a season, so they had, were trying to figure out things really quickly.
Yeah. I mean,
so
that's a great point because like that's kind of a similar situation to I called Traders Point games this year for Indiana SRN, and they didn't get started until September because of COVID. So like the Coach Carnes even said, Coach Sam Carnes of Traders Point, he was like, you know what, we're as we enter September, we're where we normally would be in like July, as far as like training and all that stuff. So that's like something completely different that no one even takes into consideration. The fact that like they didn't come into the season just already in October, November form. Like they had to. It was basically like August, September form for them.
Right. And so now we talk about Ball State here, and you got Notre Dame that got thumped by Alabama. Not really. They didn't really get thumped. They got beat, but they didn't get thumped. So Notre Dame loses, Ball State wins, Purdue doesn't make a bowl game, and IU loses to a sub-500 Ole Miss who's down a ton of players in the lowly Outback Bowl that they thought they got, they deserved better than.
Yeah.
So by that meaning, Notre Dame ends the season with 2 losses. IU ends the season with 2 losses. Ball State ends the season with 1 and a victory in their bowl. So does that ultimately say to us that Ball State is the best program this season in the state of Indiana?
I think that's very fair. I mean, also they're the only team in Indiana to win their conference as well. That is
true.
So I mean, hey, there's some people that would probably, argue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's all that, by this, because of this and that.
Well, let's just say this. A Ball State team that is, I would venture to say, was worse than the one this year, almost beat Notre Dame in Notre Dame a couple of years ago. Ball State's
last year.
Was it last year? Well, I mean,
no, it was 2 years ago because they had Riley and Hill.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's if it was any time last year, it's basically 10 years ago. But yeah,
it was 2 years ago.
So 2 years ago they almost beat Notre Dame, and then
they almost beat IU as well.
And I was just gonna say they've beaten IU, so that's a program that's beaten IU before, almost beat Notre Dame. So I mean, it's not unfathomable. It's not just us being homers to say that like, hey, maybe they were the best team in Indiana this year, which is wild to think about. I was gonna ask off the rip if this was the best Ball State team of all time, which I was going to say, I think absolutely because of the MAC championship. I mean, as far as they're the only team to get it done in the MAC championship. They beat San Jose State. Now, because granted, you could say 2008, but they lost the MAC championship. They lost.
Who did they beat non-conference in 2008?
2008, they beat Navy, Western Kentucky, IU, and one other team that I can't think of.
Okay. It was the year before, I believe, or the year after. It was the year before that they almost beat Nebraska.
Yeah, they almost beat Nebraska the year before, and they almost beat Michigan a year or two, either the year before or the year after. Because they almost beat Michigan in 2006 because that was the year that Michigan, the next week, was going to play Ohio State, with that famous 1-2 game with Troy Smith and all them.
Wait, how was that late in the season?
I don't know. At least that's how I remember it. It may not be that way. I'll have to go look, but I'm pretty sure
that's usually.
Well, I mean, you see Auburn. You see.
Part of the Big Ten.
Well, right, but I mean, it's not like Alabama doesn't play Chattanooga the week before Auburn.
Yeah, but they schedule those games on purpose.
Right, but I'm saying
he does that.
I'm pretty sure. Oh, maybe I'm getting it confused with yes, it was the same season and a week before.
Been the same season.
But I from what I thought is that they had the next week, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But anyway, they almost beat Michigan in the Big House the year that Michigan ended up playing Ohio State for a right to go to the national championship game and get thumped by Chris Leak in Florida.
That was 2006.
Yeah.
Or no. Or was that 5?
No,
it was 6. Yeah,
because 5 into 6 was Texas USC. 6 into 7 was Ohio State Florida.
That's right.
But yeah, so I mean, you have Ball State losing to Buffalo and Tulsa in their bowl games. You have the couple times. I mean, they never went to the MAC championship game with winning.
Was it Tulsa? I thought it was Arkansas State.
Arkansas State was one of the years with winning in limbo. So I mean, as far as that's concerned, I mean, I think it's a pretty good argument, if not the argument, for why this Ball State team is the best of all time.
Real quick. last poll comes out of the season. Where is Ball State ranked, and where are they ranked?
They are ranked because San Jose State was like top 20.
They were 22.
Were they 22? I thought they were higher than that. Okay, so they're 22.
They were 22, yeah.
So I think Ball State is...
And was Buffalo ranked?
Buffalo was also ranked. Buffalo was 21.
Okay.
So
back top 25 wins.
So I think that puts them at 21 is where I'll say.
I've heard as high as 15 potentially.
Ooh, I mean, I'll take 15.
Based off of where other teams have lost.
Gotcha.
As well, like Coastal Carolina. I mean, I don't know how far they'll fall, but it'll be interesting. I can't think of any other time a Ball State team has finished the season ranked in the top 25.
Yeah, because
even the undefeated season, they did not finish the season in the top 25.
With the way they got beat by Buffalo and Tulsa, they were long gone from the top 25 from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of postseason football to talk about. We will get to that in a moment, but first, let's go ahead and get this word from Anchor. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place. All right, we've got a lot of NFL playoffs to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the Indianapolis Colts, who finished their season 11-5. They get a 28-14 win over the Jaguars. They led 20-7 at halftime. Jonathan Taylor had an absolute day. He carried the ball 30 times for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had a 43-yard touchdown run to solidify the win in the playoff berth late in that football game to clinch things. And I didn't realize this, that the only win the Jaguars have this season was week 1 against the Colts. I didn't realize they did something that I don't think has been, well, I'm sure other teams have done it. I know other teams have done it, but like, I remember one year the Panthers did the same thing, won the first game and then lost 15 in a row, so that's rough. But the Colts go 11-5, they're second in the AFC South. The Titans clinched the AFC South with a 37-yard field goal with 18 seconds left to beat Houston 41-38. I'll take the blame for that because I wasn't watching the Titans game, and then I turned it on to see if they would lose, and then they didn't. They ended up getting the win. So I was kind of sad about that. Was hoping the Texans could knock them off. But, I mean, at the end of the day, though, B. Scott, it was a difference between playing the Ravens and the Bills, which isn't an upgrade really either way.
But it was a difference of going on the road to Buffalo
yes.
or hosting the Ravens.
Now, but is Buffalo
you never know in Buffalo. You could be playing in the middle of a blizzard.
Well, I did check it. It's going to be like partly cloudy and like not super cold. I mean, it's going to be like 20s or 30s, but it's not going to be like,
which is like balmy for Buffalo.
Yeah, it's not going to be like, 10 degrees in a snowstorm with 15-mile-an-hour winds. I think the wind is going to be like
the last time the Colts were there.
Yes, exactly. So
Frank Gore having to run through like 7 inches of snow.
Right.
And everybody wondering why are they playing so bad?
Yeah. I wonder why.
You can't even see the field.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even think Josh Allen was on the Bills during that time, was he? Was it? He may
have been. I think he was, because it wasn't that long ago.
Well, it was because the Bills had LaShawn McCoy, and LaShawn McCoy is like on his 3rd team since then, I feel like.
Yeah, it was whatever. I think it was like Frank Gore's 1st or 2nd year with the Colts, but yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah, it was definitely a crazy game for sure. But yeah, so the Colts could have been at home. Now, the question I was going to ask, though, B. Scott, real quick, is that, like, are fans allowed in Buffalo right now? Have they had fans this year?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, because it's in New York.
Because, I mean, I get the whole, like, the argument of, like, you're on the road, you're not sleeping in your bed, it's unfamiliar. I don't think it's it's as
Even if
important.
they were allowing fans, it's not like they're allowing a ton, so it's not
Right.
going to make a huge difference. But it is in New York, and New York is probably one of the strictest states outside of California.
Right.
So I don't think they're allowing fans.
Right.
I'm pretty sure they're not.
So yeah, that'll be an interesting wrinkle into home field. Not just for the Bills, but for the other teams that are home as well. But the Colts this season, they had the 14th best offense. They were 8th in passing, 16th in rushing. They were 9th in points per game. They had the 8th best defense, 18th in passing, 2nd against the run, 12th in how many points they allowed per game. And as far as the thoughts on the season, like I said a little bit in the beginning, the fact that this team is the 7th seed in the AFC is a testament to how tough the AFC is. I mean, the Colts were almost 11-5 and not in the playoffs. Just kind of like what we always joke about the Patriots. That one year they were 11-5 and didn't make it. The Colts were almost in that very same boat
with an added team. With an added team.
Yeah,
we're still almost not in.
If this was 2019, I mean, they would have been out. They wouldn't have made the playoffs, which would have been wild.
2020, you mean? Because 2020 playoffs.
All right, but 2020 into 2021, 19 into 20 was still 6 teams. But yeah, so I mean, it just shows you how tough the AFC is, which is why going into the playoffs this year, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the Colts can make a decent run. They're going to be a tough out, but at the same time, if they lose, it's not going to be like, other seasons if they've gotten in and lost or if, anything like that. It's going to be a thing where, look, it's going to be a buzzsaw. Even if the Colts win this week, they have to play the Chiefs the following week, which will be rough. So, it's going to, I'm counting the rest of this is kind of just gravy on a great season because it's been a fantastic year for the Indianapolis Colts because we thought going into the year that this would be about their record. We thought they'd go 4-2 in the division. That's what they did. They went 4-2.
We didn't think they'd lose to Jacksonville, though.
No, didn't think they'd lose to Jacksonville, but we also weren't sure that they would sweep the NFC North, which they did. They did lose to Baltimore, which was a loss we thought was going to happen. They did lose in Pittsburgh, which was a loss we thought was going to happen.
Cleveland. You do realize this team is 1-4. The record is 1-4 against the other playoff teams in the AFC that they faced.
Right. I mean,
which is a reason why they almost were left out.
Right.
If we're going to look at this, I mean, that was a big reason why they almost got left out.
Yes. So yeah, but I think it was a great year for the Colts. The AFC is really tough. Phillip Rivers had a great season. He was 13th best in passer rating, which was up from 17th last year. So he had an up season. Jonathan Taylor is an 1,000-yard rusher, which comes off of Marlon Mack last season, who was the 1,000-yard rusher. So I mean, hey, next year they're gonna have 2 1,000-yard backs in that backfield, which will be pretty wild to think about.
Are they? I thought Marlon Mack's a free agent.
Right. Well, I mean, you think they're not going to bring him back?
I don't know. It just depends on what.
I guess they theoretically couldn't, but at the same time, I
mean, you saw what you had with just Jonathan Taylor, Naheem Hines, and Jordan Wilkins.
I guess it depends, especially coming off injury, what Marlon Mack wants.
That's true too.
Yeah.
Because if he wasn't injured, I think he would be looking for premier back money.
Right. But did you know this, B. Scott? Well, you do because I sent you the outline and it's on there. But the last time the Colts had had back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons was back in 2006, 2007 with Joseph Adai. So back in the Joseph Adai days was the last time the Colts had this prolific of a rushing offense. I mean, they had one 1,000-yard season from Frank Gore, but the offensive line wasn't nearly as good as it is now, even without Anthony Costanzo. And it ends a streak of 5 seasons without a 1,000-yard rusher. Then they've had just 3 1,000-yard rushers since 2007, so that's pretty wild. The defense was 8th this year, up from 16th in 2019, so the defense is more fearsome. And we thought they could be 12-4. Was kind of the ceiling we put out for them, or at least I did. 10-6 was kind of where we thought was if the Colts play to what we expect them, they'll be around 12-4, 11-5, 10-6, and that's exactly where they were this season. So they met expectations, which, I mean, you can kind of say it in a tone that makes it sound like, oh, well, they just met their expectations. They did what they were supposed to do. But hey, I mean,
it's progress. It's not 8-8.
Right, exactly. It's a step in the right direction, and I mean, they still had to go out and do it, which they did.
And just think, this team was a lot. There was a couple games where this team really just went out and laid an egg. Most notably, the first game against Jacksonville. You go out and you take care of business like you can in that game, like you did against them the second time around, even though you almost let them come back. You win the division. You're the 4 seed at that point. If you don't give up the big lead in Pittsburgh, you hold on to that and you come out with that game. You win your division. You are the 4, maybe even the 3 seed at that point. This team, it was a good season in the sense that they made the playoffs. They haven't made the playoffs very much recently. And that's something that Colts fans used to take for granted during the Manning era and then early on in the Luck era as well. But, I think this is the first time I read since like 2016 or 17 that they made the playoffs. They've been out for a while.
They made it with Andrew Luck in 2018 when they beat Houston and then lost to Kansas City.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is like the second time since 2015 or 16.
Since that first initial run with Andrew Luck, where
before his injuries and everything.
Right, because when they went first season of Luck, they got beat by the Ravens in the playoffs, and then they second year they lost in the divisional round, third year they lost in the AFC Championship, and then
they lost to Denver and they lost to the Patriots.
Yeah.
But it is just, I was even while watching the game, I was thinking, man, it is weird to see, the Colts are back in the playoffs, and that is something that we just used to. We come into a season going, okay, let's just get through the season healthy, get our wins, and we'll get to the playoffs. That's always what it was. Like, always like, okay, what do we need to do to get the number 1 seed in the playoffs or a top 2 seed in the playoffs? And, now it's like, what do we need to do to even make the playoffs? That's a totally different mindset for Colts fans than what they were accustomed to for so long. So hopefully things are starting to turn the corner for the Colts. I mean, they need to get the quarterback situation straightened out for the future. But for now, I mean, I'll tell you, looking at this team, I was pleasantly surprised with how well the defense performed. I knew they were going to be good because Matt Eberflus is the real deal, and I'm very worried that they're going to lose him eventually to a head coaching gig. But the addition of DeForest Buckner was much, much, much bigger than anyone could have anticipated, because the games that he was out with injury or COVID contact tracing, the defensive line was not as good as it was with him on the field. Similar to the offensive line being not as good without Anthony Costanzo. So that was a very pleasant surprise to see just how tough of a defense this was, and to be leading a statistical category through most of the season. That was pretty impressive. If looking back on the season, that was one of the big pluses, and that makes you very excited for the future because there's a few weaknesses on defense, but they're not glaring weaknesses. Like, everybody keeps saying, oh, they need to shore up the pass rush. Justin Houston isn't getting any younger. Yeah, well, I still like Justin Houston. I still like the Colts pass rush because they got to the quarterback frequently. I mean, they sacked how many sacks did they have against Jacksonville? Like 5 or 6?
Yeah.
It was something unreal. And it wasn't that long ago that the Colts were only putting up about 5 or 6 sacks in an entire season. So I really like the progress of the defense. I still think the secondary, especially corners, can get stronger. I think you're pretty much set at safety, just build some depth there, but the corners need a little bit of work. But otherwise, this defense is built as a cornerstone for this team going forward in their success. Now you have a run game and an offensive line. You need to work on your wide receivers, and you need to work at quarterback. And this team's just a few pieces away, in my opinion, from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender.
Not to get ahead of ourselves into future podcasts here, but because like all the mock drafts I see have the Colts still taking an edge rusher. Do you think they're gonna do that? Because like that's what I feel like that's something that like recently the mock drafts and like pundits always kind of put the Colts as edge rush. It's kind of like back in the day. Oh, they'll take a wide receiver or whatever when they had they were stacked.
I would put edge rush as a need.
I mean, yeah, for sure, but
I wouldn't put edge rush. When you look at the first round talent that far back, there's maybe one good edge rusher where the Colts are picking that if he's available, maybe you look at him, and that's Carlos Basham out of Wake Forest. But even then, when you look at what else would be potentially available around there, with wide receiver being a position of pretty much big need, with not knowing what the future of T.Y. Hilton's going to look like. Wide receiver is going to be very, very deep this year in the draft. Around where the Colts are picking, there is a possibility that Devontae Smith from Alabama may be available. Rondale Moore from Purdue may be available. Rashad Bateman from Minnesota may be available. So there's some names to watch there. Tight end. If the Colts were picking a little bit higher, I would say try to get Kyle Pitts out of Florida. Because tight end, you don't know what Jack Doyle's going to do. And Mo Alley Cox is hit or miss. Trey Burton's going to be a free agent again. So tight end is a big area. And then quarterback, where they're picking, it could be a stretch, but, Mac Jones maybe around there from Alabama, as well as Kyle Trask from Florida. So there's going to be a lot of options. There's even some mock drafts I've seen where some really good left tackles have fallen. And that's actually, I feel like, is going to be the biggest need for the Colts, because with this injury to Anthony Costanzo, I would not be the least bit surprised to see him retire in the offseason. That idea was heavy on his mind this past offseason. And now that he's got an injury to nurse, and, it's probably right back in his mind again. And I could see him actually going through with it this year. So getting somebody like a Samuel Cosmi out of Texas, who was projected in the top 10, but because of other needs for those teams ahead, has fallen back into the range for the Colts, or Alex Leatherwood out of Alabama. Those are two names to look out for at tackle for the Colts that could be really solid pickups that have fallen based on other needs of the teams ahead of the Colts.
Well, there you go. We already got our mini draft preview from B. Scott as far as who the Colts could potentially take. I like it. I'm here for it. But before we get to that, hopefully we've got some more playoff stuff to talk about with the Indianapolis Colts. Hopefully it won't just be this week. But looking at the wild card round against the Bills, it is time to finally make our prediction there and see what we think about as far as the Indianapolis Colts go. But before that, we want to just remind you can follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. You can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. We do have we upload the podcast there every week if you do miss it live, which you can catch it live at twitch.tv/3C Media. Also, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. But yeah, we had our best of podcast that we normally would have a release last week up there as a YouTube exclusive, so go check that out. We have some other ideas in the works as well. So make sure you're linked in to all the socials so you don't miss any Crash Course content. So yeah, let's get into our prediction here for who we think is going to win this wild card round between the Colts and the Buffalo Bills. The Bills, of course, 13-3, the AFC East champion, the 2 seed in the AFC playoffs. Looking at this matchup, I mean, the Bills, like I said, 13-3 AFC champs. AFC East champs. They finished the season 6-0 after their bye week. Of course, there was like a little bit of a stretch during the season where they struggled offensively a little bit, especially with Josh Allen and company there. But this season they are 3-2 against playoff teams, and they are 10-1 against non-playoff teams. I mean, I know you mentioned the Colts and their record versus playoff teams this year, but I also think that
AFC playoff teams. I'm pretty sure
that's true, because that brings their record up a little bit.
Yeah, because they beat the 1 seed from the NFC,
right?
The Packers.
I think
they also beat the Bears.
I think the Colts' overall schedule, and that was in Chicago when the Bears were also like starting 5-1 and beating the Buccaneers as well and all that kind of stuff. So I I think the Colts are a different team than they were early in the season, where they had some of those losses. Obviously, not all of them, but some of them when they lost.
Especially the Browns.
Browns, yeah. That's
remember against the Browns, they did not have Darius Leonard.
Yeah,
that's huge.
So that's one thing, and then I just think overall the Colts' schedule has been way tougher than what the Bills' schedule has been. Obviously the Bills are the 2 seed; they're not a fluke. I'm not saying that, but at the same time,
the division schedule alone.
Right.
The Colts had to play the Titans twice, whereas the Bills had to play the Dolphins.
The Jets and the Patriots, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but also the Dolphins, who were a playoff kind of, around their caliber team, but still not, obviously they're not a playoff team. So it's definitely tough. And also with the Colts, they also have a Texans team that was down this year, but definitely, still solid.
Competitive. Yeah, Texans team.
Right. So, obviously the AFC South a lot better than the AFC East. The schedule for the Bills was a little bit lighter than the Colts. The Bills do have the 4th best offense, 2nd in passing, 19th in rushing. But looking at the stats, the Colts are 4-1 versus top 16 passing teams. So even though the Colts have struggled this year against the pass statistically, they have ultimately come back and won the game against those teams that have had these great passers on their squad. Look, earlier in the year they beat Aaron Rodgers. They've had to go up against Baker Mayfield, some great
Ben Roethlisberger,
some great quarterbacks this season, and still have come up rather favorably, or at least somewhat favorably. And then the Bills do have the 10th best defense. They're 8th against the pass, 20th against the run. The Colts have played 4 games against the top 15 defenses in football, 2-2 record. Against those defenses, they have scored 22 points per game, which versus the rest of their opponents, they scored 30 points per game. But hey, that's still 21 points if the defense can play well, and that's gonna be the big test. It's going to be the Bills. It's going to be Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and the rest of the Bills wide receivers against the Colts secondary. If the Colts secondary can contain and shut down Josh Allen and that passing game, the running game isn't super great for Buffalo, so the Colts can shut that down and the defense can flourish. But if Josh Allen comes out and spreading it all over the field and putting up a ton of stats and a ton of numbers like he can possibly do, then that's where the Colts will somewhat flounder. But my ultimate prediction is that the Colts do win. I think they do upset the Bills this week and advance to play the Chiefs in the divisional round. I do think the Colts get the win here.
Yeah, I agree. I do think the Colts will get the win here too, for 2 reasons. One, our defense. The Colts defense is really good. Darius Leonard, this is his first career playoff game, so he's going to be fired up to play in this one. Secondly, when I look at the Bills defense and I see that they're 20th versus the run, and I just see what Jonathan Taylor has done here recently, one of the biggest keys to beating Josh Allen is keeping Josh Allen off the field and controlling the play of the play clock, or controlling the clock, and if you have a run game that can just keep pounding and get stronger as the game goes on, that is going to be very beneficial to you. That's the key not only to beating Josh Allen, but that's also the key to beating Patrick Mahomes or anybody. Seriously, there was several times. I think even maybe not against the Packers. That was a little bit more back and forth. But if the Colts run game can show up like it has here the past few weeks, that gives the Colts the best chance to win. You're not going to see. One thing you don't want to see is you do not want to see Phillip Rivers get into a shootout with Josh Allen. That is not going to end well for the Colts. All it takes is a few stops by the Colts defense and the Colts offense to run clock with their run game and punch it into the end zone a couple times. And that is going to be a huge factor. That's going to really boost the Colts' odds of winning this game, because of just being able to keep Josh Allen off the field for long periods of time and get your defense rest. Because one of the things that people don't talk about with the Bills is Josh Allen's ability to extend the play with his legs. He's got a great arm, but he also has a great ability to scramble and extend plays. So the Colts are going to have to work. I mean, Colts know they can get good pass. They can get a good pass rush and get pressure on Josh Allen. But the thing is, can you contain him once you get that pressure on him? Because he has that scramble ability. So that's going to be key for them as well. Now, he's not a Lamar Jackson by any stretch of the imagination, but he's also not Aaron Rodgers or, Phillip Rivers by any means either. So that's going to be two keys to this game. Can the Colts contain Josh Allen when he extends a play, and can the Colts run game just keep pounding and keep Josh Allen on the sidelines? And if they can do those things, Colts win this game.
All right, good. We can both celebrate then if the Colts do pull off the win. I don't have to be put in the doghouse. I like it. I'm excited for it. Oh yeah, it's going to be a fun week it's what's funny is
also nobody's going to talk about this. Frank Reich is returning to Buffalo.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's key.
Where he had that amazing playoff game as a backup quarterback for them.
Yeah, I like it. All the storylines are there.
That's great.
Well, speaking of storylines, let's look at the rest of the NFL. Just going quickly through the AFC and NFC playoff picture. The Chiefs are the best team in the AFC. They get a first-round bye. We talked about the Bills being the 2 seed. Steelers are the 3 seed, AFC North champions. The Titans do win the AFC South. They are the 4 seed. The other 2 wildcard teams beside the Colts are the 5th-seeded Ravens and the 6th-seeded Browns. Over in the NFC, you have the Packers as the 1 seed, the Saints as the 2 seed, the Saints winning the NFC South, Packers the NFC North. NFC West goes to the Seahawks. The Washington football team, by way of beating the Eagles, who apparently decided to tank the last little bit of that game against Washington yesterday. Washington does get in as the 4 seed. The Buccaneers, Rams, and Bears are the 3 wild card teams. So first, before we get into hot or cold, what do you think about the field of 14 as opposed to the field of 12? Because obviously the field of 12 means the Colts aren't in, but it also means the Bears aren't in. Would we feel any differently if it was like Seahawks, Rams, Washington? I mean, it'd be the same, I guess, 3, 6, 4, whatever matchups. The only difference is 2-7. But are we good with the field being 2 teams bigger this year with the Bears and Colts being the beneficiaries?
I do. It's going to sound really homerish, but especially on the AFC side,
right,
where, the AFC was just loaded. I guess on the NFC side of things, you kind of feel jilted because, Washington got in with a losing record.
Well, they would have been in regardless, no matter what, because of the...
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know, but still, you had one of your division winners that it was just like, really?
Right.
Okay. Does this division really have to play in the playoffs? Because, let's be honest...
what would be an interesting wrinkle? I'm sorry to cut you off, B. Scott. An interesting wrinkle would be like in the future you have to be 500 or better to host a playoff game.
Yeah.
And so that way, by virtue of that,
why can't it be like the NBA?
Well,
I guess the NBA, the division winners.
Yeah, divisions. We just get rid of those in the NBA. Get rid of those in the NBA.
There's only like 2 divisions anyway.
Yeah. I cannot. I can tell you like 2 teams that are in the Pacers.
Are the Central. I just know the Pacers are the Central from looking at the banners.
Right. And I know 2 teams. I know the Cavs are, and I know the Bulls are, and those are the only 2 teams that I know of.
I think the Pistons are.
Yeah, the Pistons are too. But yeah, I was like. I have no idea. So yeah, just get rid of those in the NBA. But I do see. I'm a fan of like divisions in divisions in football and conferences in college football. Like I think those are always good to have and fun to watch out for those little subplots on the season.
What I think it should be is if you win your division, you get into the playoffs.
Yes,
but. If you win your division at sub 500 or at 500, you don't. I don't think you should automatically get slotted in at the 4 seed.
Right.
I think, okay, good. You get an automatic bid into the playoffs, kind of like in the NCAA basketball tournament. You won your conference tournament, you get an automatic bid. That doesn't mean you get one of the higher automatic bids. You
right.
You get slotted in based off of your resume. I think that's the way it should be.
It's like when NASCAR used to have provisionals for past champions. Like,
yeah.
like just put them at the back. They make it in by virtue of
right. Because essentially that is how the AFC turned out.
Yeah.
Based off of record, this is where the teams all slotted in. Division winners, where they just so happen to have the better records. But having Washington as a 4 seed and getting to host when the Buccaneers were better, the Rams were better. The Bears, I don't think they should get a chance to host, but the Buccaneers and the Rams have a better case for hosting a game. So I think you get an automatic bid to the playoffs, but you get seeded based on your overall record and resume.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting move and a good move.
To answer your question, I do like having the 7 teams. I think it makes getting that 1 seed so much more critical rather than, because you could just go, I'm okay with the 2 seed. I'll still get the first round bye, and if I make it to the AFC Championship, then I'll have to go on the road. Well, that's totally fine.
How many times were the Patriots the 2 seed and just okay with it and like benching their starters that final
whereas
week?
Now it's only the 1 seed that gets that bye. That's a big factor. I think that rewards that 1 seed so much more.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It makes it more meaningful.
I'm with you. So let's get into hot or cold. If you are new to the podcast or to the YouTube channel or the Twitch channel, this is where B. Scott and I answer questions and tell if it's going to be a hot take or a cold take. It's funny, going through these, I was like, I make strong counter arguments, but then ultimately pick the opposite a lot of times. So we'll see how this goes. Question number 1. The Steelers will be one and done. That, for me, is a cold take. As much as I'd like to pick the Browns to win a playoff game, and it is 2020. It was 2020. It's a wild year. It's the 2020 NFL season still. So it'd be wild to see the Browns get that win. The Browns this season are 4-3 versus playoff teams, 7-2 against the rest of the field. Their three of their 11 wins came against a team with a winning record, however. So again, kind of like with the Bills, they beat up on a lot of teams that weren't really the greatest. I mean, the Steelers. A lot of people gave the Steelers flack earlier in the season when they were going undefeated. There were some arguments there that they weren't really beating good teams, but at the same time, I mean, they went out and beat the Ravens when they were still, the second time they beat the Ravens, I think it was without Lamar Jackson, but the first time it was with Lamar Jackson. They beat, they beat the Titans.
Wasn't that the game where the Ravens had nobody, or they pushed that game back?
That was the second game. Yeah. That was a week I think before they lost to the Washington football team, and that started their skid. And that kind of makes you kind of suspect of what the Steelers could do, because the Steelers have been kind of on a losing skid as of recent. But I will say this: the only reason they didn't beat the Browns this weekend is because they benched Ben Roethlisberger. That may not be the only reason, but the Browns win. The only reason the Browns are 10-6 or 11-5 in part because the Steelers didn't play at full strength this weekend.
Essentially, the Browns are in the playoffs because I guess the Dolphins lost, so the Browns would have been in, but they were one of those teams that almost didn't get in.
Right.
Well.
So the Steelers went on the road earlier this season and did beat the Titans. So I mean, the Steelers do have some good wins on their docket this season. I know, like I said, I know they had kind of a rough go of it at the end of the year. But looking at their wins earlier in the season, I mean, they did beat the Ravens in Baltimore early in the season. They did lose some games, like I said here recently. But looking back, one of their wins at the beginning of the year was against this Browns team at home, and they won 38-7. Now, you could make the argument, that the Browns are a different team and that kind of thing, but I think that the Steelers, I think, are the better team. They have I think their win against the Colts put this team back on track. Because I'm not really looking too much at Week 17, but prior to that point, they had lost. They lost to the Washington football team. They lost to the Bills. They lost to the Bengals on the road the week before. And then that coming back from 17 points down and beating the Colts, I think kind of gave this team their mojo back at the right time. So I'm looking less the fact they've lost 4 of their last 5 and looking more at the fact that they are that they got that big win over the Colts, another playoff team, to kind of get them back in the right mindset. And so I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think the Steelers do win. So it's a cold take that they're going to be one and done.
Yeah, I agree. It's a cold take as well. I don't. I mean, I know the Browns are playing better after. They're playing better as of late and everything, but I don't know. I feel like their emotions may get to them. I don't know. And Pittsburgh, as you know, Ben Roethlisberger has been there, done that, got the trophies, and that is going to help, especially in this kind of weird season and everything. But I think you're right. They righted the ship a little bit against the Colts, and it didn't really show fully because of them resting their guys for the playoffs essentially against the Browns. But that game was still close. That was still a pretty close game. So yeah, I think the Steelers ultimately win this game.
So, question number 2, Derrick Henry will rush for over 150 yards against the Ravens. I have this as a hot take. He did rush for 133 yards in the 30-24 win for the Titans over the Ravens this season. The Ravens do have the 9th best rushing defense, but there you go. I mean, a top 10 rushing defense, and Derrick Henry still put up 133 yards. And of course, this is a game last year in the playoffs where Derrick Henry had a big game against the Ravens as well. I don't think the Ravens are as good as they were last year. The funny thing is that this game has kind of the makeup of what kind of, it's like what we see sometimes, in sports and in the NFL where, the Ravens should have beat the Titans last year at home, so that means, by, virtue of, parity and, just how things work in sports sometimes, they'll beat them when they're a worse team on the road this year. But I do think that the Titans win this game, and I think it's on the back of Derrick Henry rushing for over 150 yards. I don't think he's going to be much over that, but I think he's going to be, 150, 160 yards on the day. I think he has a good game, and the Titans ultimately win.
I'm going to say this is a cold take because I don't think he gets to 150. I think he gets pretty darn close, but he doesn't ultimately hit 150 or more. Also, I'm saying this is a cold take because Baltimore's playing with a different swagger as of the past few weeks, and that's really I think it's going to roll over into the playoffs as well. Offensively, they're clicking more. Lamar Jackson is starting to play to his strengths again, which means he's running the ball a lot. So it's one of those things where, if they're running the ball well, that keeps Derrick Henry on the sidelines. And remember, all you have to do is get like a couple touchdown lead on the Titans, and all of a sudden Derrick Henry is standing on the sidelines. He's not even in the game because he's basically obsolete. Now, they didn't do that against the Texans this past weekend when they fell behind, but they fell behind by I think a touchdown. But still, it was it is going to be an interesting game to watch just because the Ravens are playing much better. But that's not the question. Are the Ravens going to win or not? That's not the question. The question is Derrick Henry going to rush for 150 yards or more? No, Derrick Henry is not going to rush for 150 yards or more. He's going to get close, but he's not going to hit it.
Who do you think wins though? Who you taking?
I'm going to go with the Ravens. Mostly because the Ravens are playing a lot better. They've kind of got like I said, they got their swagger back. They're playing to their strengths. And the Titans just, I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on the Titans, especially if it gets down to special teams. They don't have the most reliable special teams. That could cost them. And I don't know what the weather's going to be like in Baltimore. It could be rainy. And
we'll be in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, in Tennessee. It could be rainy for all we know. So that could be a factor in the kicking game for sure. If it is rainy, I still have maybe that lead that kind of favors Tennessee because of the run game. But I feel like Baltimore is going to be much more prepared. And right now they're playing better right now, and I think than the Titans even are at this point.
So, B. Scott for the AFC, you've got the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Colts. I've got the Steelers, the Titans, and the Colts. So we'll see how that plays out. Switching over to the NFC, that's what the last three questions are going to be about. So first question is, the Saints need Alvin Kamara to beat the Bears. The reason why this is important to note and kind of an important question is because Alvin Kamara missed Week 17 due to COVID, and there is a chance he could miss the wild card game. Now, earlier this season, the Saints did beat the Bears 26-23 in overtime, and Kamara was a relatively big factor. He didn't score any touchdowns, but he did rush for 67 yards and had a 96 through the air, amounting to 163 total yards. But the reason why I say this is a cold take is that the plan is for Michael Thomas to be back from IR. If Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara are in the game, well, it was nice seeing you this season in Chicago. You did make the playoffs, but it's going to be sayonara. But it is going to be I think a little bit of a tougher game for the Saints if Kamara can't play. But the fact that you're going to have Michael Thomas back with Drew Brees, that's going to be a big, fortune, a big leg up for the Saints. And that's why I think it's a cold take. The Saints will ultimately be okay and win against the Bears.
Yeah, I do think this is a cold take as well. I don't even think if Michael Thomas wasn't going to be back, they need somebody, but I think they just have enough to get by the Bears at this point. Really use this week to make sure everybody gets back ready for the next game. I just don't have faith in the Bears, to be honest. I just don't think Mitchell Trubisky is going to really light up the world in this game. Also, I feel like the Saints are going to be playing with an added push a little bit because there are several reports out there that Drew Brees is going to hang it up after this season. So they definitely don't want his last game to be a loss to the Bears. So they're going to be playing with a little extra fire in their bellies to go out there and win it for their quarterback.
Very true. The next question is, the Seahawks will win their 11th straight home playoff game on Sunday. For me, that's a hot take. The Rams have a higher ranked offense and defense, looking at the statistical numbers there. But they are 3-3 down the stretch. So the Rams haven't, they just kind of had a weird season. They've, obviously you got the loss to the Jets, which isn't great. But they've beaten the Seahawks somewhere, this season earlier on. So, you kind of don't know what Rams team you're going to get. The Seahawks are on a 4-game winning streak. They have won 5 of the last 6 over the Rams at home with the NFC. They won 5 of the last 6, which included a win over the Rams at home with the NFC West on the line. So, in a de facto playoff game, the Seahawks did beat the Rams at home. I think the Seahawks are the better team. You've got, I think a better coach quarterback combo with Carroll and Wilson than you do with McVay and Goff. Goff hasn't played super great here recently, so I'm going with the Seahawks to get the win. It's a hot take.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to go with the Seahawks as well. Remember, this is one of the teams that was in the hunt for the 1 seed at one point this season. Yeah, they've had their ups and downs as well, the Seahawks have, but I feel like they know the Rams. This isn't going to be a team that they are just seeing for the first time. They've already met twice this year. So I got the Seahawks. This is definitely the Seahawks are going to win this one and continue that win streak at home.
Final question of the podcast. The Washington football team will upset Tampa Bay, and you know what? I'm getting crazy with it. I think it's a hot take. The Washington football team will get the win. I'm here for the story. I want to see Alex Smith, who's undoubtedly going to win Comeback Player of the Year. I'm excited to see him and that team do well. I knew when Ron...
He named Comeback Player of the Year after him. That movement's got to push.
What's that? Wait, sorry, what?
Have you seen the movement of people are wanting them to rename the Comeback Player of the Year award after him?
Who's it? For it? Yeah, I was gonna say, is it named after anyone right now?
I don't think so, but put a name on it. Put the Alex Smith comeback
Oh,
player
I
of the
mean,
year.
yeah, that's what I'm saying is that, like, I mean, what's the reason against not naming it? And the only reason I could think of
You got a name, but it
yeah,
doesn't.
right. So I'm all for. I mean, to look at like what he went through, and I know, I mean, obviously there's been other players that have gone through, you know, comeback trails, but not like this. And the fact
He
that
almost
he,
died.
right, that's what I'm
He
saying. I was going,
almost died.
yeah, like that's just insane. And so, like, yeah, like watching some of those plays where like the pocket starts to collapse on him, I'm like, oh, I don't know what's gonna happen. But you know, yeah, I'm excited to see what happens there, to see if he, you know, to see if he can win comeback. Well, he's going to win comeback player of the year, but see if they can
I hope.
be successful. Yeah, I don't know who else would get it honestly ahead of him. But yeah, first of all, both teams are combined 2-9 versus playoff teams this season. The Buccaneers both times against the Saints took the L. They lost to the Bears earlier this season. They've, you know, lost to the Chiefs earlier this season. Now, granted, obviously it's 7-9.
The Chiefs are the Chiefs.
Well, right, but I'm just saying it's another.
That one out.
Well, that's another team that
who
like
hasn't lost to the Chiefs this season.
However, you look at the fact that Tampa Bay with Tom Brady and Mike Evans and all this, Rob Gronkowski, all this firepower, you know, essentially, I mean, they should be putting up maybe not the same numbers, but similar numbers, you would think. They should be better than, they should be able to at least keep up with the Saints, keep up with the Chiefs, keep up with, you know, some of the teams they've lost to. They should be able to beat the Bears, you know. So the Buccaneers have had the luxury of playing and beating up on some teams, you know, especially in their division with, you know, they've got the Panthers and the Falcons there. And that, granted, the Washington football team obviously has done their fair share of losing too at 7-9. But the Washington does have the fourth ranked defense, which Tampa Bay is 1-3 versus top 10 defenses this season. And here's a fun fact for you, B. Scott. Since 2002, 500 or worse teams in the playoffs are 4-0. You've got the Seahawks at 7-9, got the win. You've got the 8-8. What team was it? The 8-8 Tim Tebow led Broncos that got the win. So you have a history of, you know, teams that maybe, you know, the pundits, you know, the talking heads all week said, hey, you know what, this team doesn't deserve to be in the playoffs. They're hosting a game. It's a travesty. They've gone out and got the win. So I'm pushing in all the chips. I think the Washington football team gets the win. And they will, I mean, congratulations, you get to go play the Packers the following week. But I think in the first year of 14 teams in the playoffs for the NFL, I think both 7 seeds get it done, including the Washington football team. It's a hot take for me.
And that's like the old 3C digging through research files for JMV. Right there, that fun fact. And you actually got to use it rather than it just go to the side. You know, I think this is a hot take as well. This Washington defense is for real. I mean, there was a game a few weeks back where the offense, I don't think the offense scored a single point. The defense did all the scoring and the team won. So, I mean, I think they, you know, obviously I think they kicked a couple field goals, but the offense did punch it in the end zone. They did not score a single touchdown. Every touchdown scored was by the defense. So, and also, when I look at this Buccaneers team, I keep going back to a Monday Night Football game that they had at the New York Giants, and they had to come from behind and win this game. The New York Giants nearly beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday Night Football. They just don't look as, you know, like a typical Tom Brady team. They don't give you that chill down your spine or that, we gotta face Tom Brady in the playoffs. You know, you just don't get that feel with the Buccaneers. So yeah, I think that the Washington football team can actually pull this one off because of their defense. You know, all Alex Smith really has to do is make enough plays to give the defense a little bit of a rest, you know, score a couple once or twice, and just let the defense take control of this game. Let Chase Young loose, and you know, he's not going to have to worry about Tom Brady scrambling out of the pocket or anything. So I think because of that defense, Washington wins this game. So I think it's a hot take.
So there you have it on the NFC side. I think we all picked the same teams. We've got the Saints winning. We've got the Seahawks and the Washington football team. So that'll be a fun weekend of NFL playoff action, and that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can always find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87. The Twitter game has definitely excelled here in the past few weeks.
So make sure you go over there and follow B. Scott. Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. Like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. Go follow if you're listening on the listening end on the Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify if you're on that end. Go follow us on Twitch where you can interact with us live every Monday night. Go over there.
Also, we want to give a shout out to a fellow podcast.
Yes, real quick before we have an actual read for them next week. But my cousin, Adam Collins, he's got a podcast out there. It is Eat, Drink, and Board Game. Let me make sure I get it right here. It's hold on, let me pull that up. Let me check my notes here real quick. I said it and then I doubted myself. It's Eat, Lunch, and Board Game. It's all about board games. That's what it was. I knew it was I knew it was about eating and board games. That's all you really need to know. So that is live right now. He's got how many episodes? He's got 6 right now up there. So go check that out. And we'll have a full-fledged actual, read for him next week. And I do apologize because I was supposed to add it this weekend. That did slip my mind, so I apologize.
We threw it in on the fly.
So we'll do it live. But yeah, thanks.
We're pros like that.
We are pros like that. And remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. Next week, we are actually going to be on Tuesday. Because of the national championship game, Ohio State, Alabama, we'll be talking about not only the national championship game, but we'll be recapping the college football season as well as talking divisional round of the NFL playoffs. So a lot of football coming your way here over the next few weeks. Very excited to get to that. But until then, have a good week, everybody.